With the emphasis my channel has surrounding single-player experiences and the bosses that frame them, it's rare I'm able to give my take on multiplayer games. Though the landscape is dominated by competitive throwdowns from the professional to pedestrian level, there exists a group format where players can thrive together, cooperative games. That's not to say there's anything wrong with competition, far from it. But as my tastes have grown over the years, I've found myself leaning more toward challenging adventures my friends and I can band together to overcome. So when Square Enix offered a plane ride out to the gameplay premiere of People Can Fly's new cooperative game with a place to stay and swag to boot, I didn't hesitate to take flight and test out Outriders. You may know People Can Fly best for their work alongside Epic on Bulletstorm in the Gears of War franchise. They've since become independent to chase their own creative vision, which was the genesis for their new 3-player co-op shooter, Outriders. I was really excited to see how the game would play to the strengths of their previous titles, while also using their full creative reign to evolve beyond their comfort zone. Today I'll share with you all the juicy details from my 2 hours with Outriders, give you my personal takeaways, and offer some questions to keep in mind as we look toward release. Through this, I hope to give you an early snapshot of the game's features, potential, and value for your own personal tastes. The key decision to begin your journey is the class you choose to play. During the demo, there were 3 classes available, with the tease for a 4th and final class to be revealed later this year. First up, the Devastator, an earthbending bruiser that makes use of powerful force and defense to get up close and personal with enemies to tank and dish out massive damage. Though this is the basic gist of his playstyle, there is nuance and 8 unlockable powers you can allot to 3 slots at a given time, and a skill tree reminiscent of Borderlands that goes down 3 routes emphasizing different combat priorities, such as ability damage and cooldown time. In my playtime with the Devastator, I started with a solid AoE ground slam, with a neat touch of going through cover, a casing of rocks that worked as armor, and an aerial diving AoE slam that brutally demolished most foes. The most unique bit is class-specific healing methods. With the Devastator, for instance, you heal every time a foe dies within close range. This is a brilliant twist that allows you to maximize your ability to be a tank as long as you're doling out deadly blows. Of course, your team can also assist, starting with the Trickster, a time-manipulating assassin that works in a more supportive role, but still packs a lethal punch with the right timing. My first run through of the demo, I was a Devastator playing with the Trickster. The Trickster had multiple methods of slowing down time, including a large bubble. Not only did enemies within its grasp slow, but attacks as well. My favorite wow moment from the entire demo was when my partner and I stared in awe as bullets from the exterior were brought to a halt as soon as they hit its border. This allowed for us to combo my AoE slams into helplessly slow enemies, which was devilishly satisfying. The Trickster also heals from nearby deaths and has a shield to offset its squishier nature. Then came the Pyromancer. Though I never played it myself, round 2 of the demo was a triple tango with each class, and our Pyro partner gave us the lowdown on its abilities. More of a caster class, the Pyromancer has various ways to set enemies aflame from afar. This marks them with damage over time, and any enemies set ablaze that die give HP to the caster. As you can imagine, these classes could combine for numerous devastating combos, all of which felt very intuitive. Each class balances each other's strengths and weaknesses in a way that made the co-op experience highly rewarding. Of course, you can't spam abilities endlessly, and that is where firearms come in as a bridge to fill that downtime. The weapons were very basic, ranging from automatic rifles to pistols to snipers to shotguns, and I'm sure you can fill in the blanks as to which guns are more effective on certain classes over others. A beautiful touch beyond this, though, are rare drops receiving perks unique to your class's skill set. For example, as the Devastator, I received a rifle that slowly regained HP as I shot enemies. This gave even more regen for a tank, which is invaluable. The weapons all handled quite well despite my mediocre controller aim, and though they were simple, the developers assured us that the designs and perks will grow progressively more robust as the journey continues. Leading us to the fair question, how do you obtain these weapons? As may be familiar from similar genre standouts such as Borderlands or Destiny, the game leaks a constant drip of loot as you complete quests and slay your enemies. Though it's relatively straightforward, the depth comes from the world level mechanic. At the start, enemies will be shockingly easy. After a bit of progress, you gain access to world level 2, cluing you into the cause of the cakewalk. In the beginning, you're facing enemies below the standard difficulty. As you level up and gain access to new world levels, you have the choice to amp up the challenge in pursuit of rare loot. This gives the host of the world control not only over difficulty on the fly, but the exact odds of getting legendary rewards. Best of all, the devs promise at the outset that there will be no loot boxes or microtransactions. The thought of a class-based RPG looter shooter with no monetary nonsense in 2020 is an enticing proposition, making this a good time to share my personal opinions on the game's direction. Though I shared my thoughts briefly throughout the gameplay rundown, I'd like to go a bit more in depth. Before we dive straight in, let's look at how balanced the structure is. I played through the game twice, first in duo, then in a trio. As more players were added, the enemies became tankier. That said, even when amping the world level up, it was quite manageable as long as you made proper use of the cover system, which will be familiar to anyone who's played Gears of War. While I didn't have time for a solo experience, I did hear rumbles of some folks having difficulties making it through the entire demo on their own. Obviously, this will come down to player skill and perseverance, with us admittedly not having the luxury of endless time to swallow multiple defeats. They did tell us online matchmaking would be available, so you're free to play with randoms online if your friends don't buy in. I will say that seeing all the amazing synergies possible, and knowing that you can mix and match classes in any way you like, emphasizes the value in opting for multiplayer. The developers assured us that balance is an ongoing endeavor, and they will do everything they can to allow an enjoyable experience for all group sizes and playstyles. Though I don't feel comfortable offering a direct opinion on the solo option since I didn't experience it for myself, the balance of co-op was excellent in the demo. To focus our attention toward the gameplay itself, it was undeniably the highlight. Both of the classes I played felt rewarding, offering deviations in playstyle and distinct value to the team. The enemy AI seemed mixed in terms of intelligence, but what they lack in brains they make up for in girth. These were some tanky boys, especially when you crank up the world level. It never felt too problematic, however, since your guns and powers offered flexibility, the cover-based aspect gives you strategic options, and coordinating combos with your team could devastate the opposition. It was during those climactic moments of action that Outriders hit its peak for me. In mentioning the cover-based mechanics, I want to highlight how diverse the design of the various combat segments are. Though you're facing similar enemies, sometimes a sniper is thrown in, or maybe a tough general that has a special ability to freeze you solid if you can't stun them in time. There were a lot of enemies with special abilities like this, and I really liked the intuitive UI that had the attacks charging right under the enemy's health bar, focusing player attention exactly where it needed to be. There was a clear effort put into making each arena feel unique, have engaging challenges, and offer varied layouts. Where the level design is lacking is everything in between. Each arena was strung along with mundane segments of land that only served to act as connecting tissue to the next combat section. There were sometimes NPCs in these areas that could give quests or maybe some raw materials, but by the end of the 2 hours, a pattern of combat arena, mindless walking, combat arena, mindless walking became apparent. It didn't bother me at all during the demo, even with that realization, because the combat and playing with my teammates was too entertaining to care. But it's fair to wonder how that would hold up over a longer runtime. On the opposite side of the coin, it's fully possible the level design will become more complex as the game continues, only time will tell. With so much praise toward the combat and gameplay loop, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what the developers considered the biggest differentiators to its competition, their focus on the narrative and deeper RPG elements. I'll be honest with you, at first the narrative was extremely off-putting. You start in a slow tutorial that has you talking with a bunch of people you have no emotional ties to or even context on. All you know is from a text scroll in the beginning that the Earth is gone and you're the last hope to colonize somewhere new. There's a mustache-twirling villain, some rootin' cowboy mentor, a lot of caricatures to get you up to speed quickly. If that doesn't suffice, you'll be getting frequent updates to your codex throughout your playtime to give more context to the characters and world. While I appreciate having those available for those who are interested, the game kicks off with rampant use of in-universe terms that have no meaning and serve to make everything sound more grandiose than it all really is, and just ends up being confusing. Things get a little bit more exciting when everyone gets slain by the locals and you get shoved into a cryopod for 30 years, awakening to a world that is much more brutal than the walkthrough nature in the bulk of the tutorial. Rolling out in a vehicle with bodies slamming against a car was a horrifying set piece that added a bit to the world building, and it was after the tutorial that the game started to find better pacing between the cutscenes and gameplay. There were a few side quests available that offered choices such as not killing this girl's captain to dumping his head at her feet like a savage, there are hub worlds full of NPCs to mingle with, and there are plenty of optional dialogue bits to dig into if you want to learn more about the world and those that inhabit it. As the 2 hours went on, I did get progressively more invested and became more of a believer in the game's ability to tell a compelling story, but I have to be honest, I don't know that focusing on this is necessarily the most wise thing when it comes to a co-op shooter, but as an absolute lover of storytelling in games, I am happy to be proven wrong, and though 2 hours is enough to get a taste, this is just a small bit of the overarching narrative that I'm sure the game will have in its final product. As for the RPG aspects, I love every bit of it. The different class trees, the varied abilities that are a blast to use, the tight gunplay and movement assisted by perks on rare loot, all of which I assume will grow deeper as the game continues. Bringing me to questions I have about what the future holds beyond the first 2 hours of Outriders. Throughout the video, I've alluded to a few things beyond the first 2 hours in speculation, and that's because outside of a few developer Q&As that gave us a loose idea of what to expect, there's not much more concrete I can offer at this time. What I can provide are a few questions I feel are worth asking as we move toward release. How will the game run on PC versus 8th gen versus 9th gen? An underrated aspect of this event was it being the first time I've played a game that is technically 9th generation, which is really exciting, though they were explicit that we were playing on high-end PCs and those versions would not be discussed. But with the game releasing so close to the next generation, it begs the question how the game will play on an original PS4 or Xbox One. The game was mostly gorgeous outside of some average texture work, with the particle effects and smooth frame rate as particular standouts. The combat felt so satisfying in motion in large part because of how flawlessly it flowed, so performance across hardware will be key to consider. What about time-gated content? In many modern co-op games, there's an element of live events introduced. An ever-changing world can be neat, and for some, it may be seen as a benefit. For me, I strongly dislike the idea of missing out on content because I'm unavailable at a given time, and would go as far to say I hate manipulative FOMO, fear of missing out, that one could argue is a driving factor for such practices. What I gathered from Outriders is that it intends to be an RPG, narrative-heavy looter-shooter with thrilling combat at its core. I love the idea of being able to get my buddies together whenever it's convenient and play at our own pace. Whether that means blowing through 20% of the game's content in one lengthy sitting, or having bite-sized play sessions over a few months as we're able. Offering that opportunity with quality design to back it would give it a unique spot within the looter-shooter market that would make me all the more likely to jump aboard day one. What about the endgame? The most hard-hitting questions at the Q&A were related to the endgame, which the developers were tight-lipped on. Fair enough when development is still in the works. Still, it's an important question. Some of my peers focused on it needing to satisfy an endgame to compete with games like Borderlands 3 or Destiny 2, but I don't necessarily agree. When it comes to decisions on what games we buy, money and time are the biggest factors for most. Sure, if you've recently played another looter-shooter, you may be less likely to crave a similar experience, but if the value proposition is strong enough and your interest is high as a result, I would wager you'd be willing to commit your time and money. To that end, when loot is a central focus of a game, players do want it to escalate to something meaningful. If at the end of a grind to the peak of Mount Loot, your only reward are the chests you emptied along the way, I'm sure some would be left feeling empty after all of that investment. To this, allow me to offer 2 points. I'm not some genius that had a fresh epiphany here. If I can figure this out, People Can Fly already did ages ago. And 2, even with the likelihood being extremely high that some end boss or activity will make your Lootapalooza worth it, the journey is important. I feel like many games in this genre have an arduous, boring beginning that feels more like an obtuse, elongated tutorial masquerading as a campaign that constantly teases the promise of something greater at the end, only delivering 1 or 2 satisfying endgame activities after jumping through countless mundane hoops. In my short time with Outriders, it was clear People Can Fly's efforts are geared toward making every step of the journey as exciting as the last. I had an absolute blast in the first 2 hours. I wasn't waiting to unlock cool abilities, I was getting them steadily. I didn't have to wait to feel powerful, I did from the get-go with a built-in mechanic to add difficulty for a handsome reward at any time. Though it may not be winning any Oscars, the writing is solid enough, and what I saw of the narrative was at least intriguing, especially if we're comparing it to the supposed competition. And the combat at its core struck a great balance between bombastic powers, fluid weaponry, and team synergy that had me entertained until the demo's final second. 2 hours of what they projected as a 40-hour experience is hardly enough to guarantee success over the full campaign, but at the very least, I feel it showed promising potential to be the next great cooperative game. I hope you enjoyed this sneak peek into Outriders. This isn't normally the type of game I'd cover, but I'm expanding this year to broader interests as long as I feel like the topic is an interesting one. It was an amazing experience going to LA and meeting folks from the industry. Talking with developers about all the things in real time that I loved about their game and seeing their faces light up is a strong reminder that behind the monetary machine driving it all, there is tons of creative passion on the ground level that shouldn't be overlooked. Once again, I'm very grateful to Square Enix for flying me out to LA, putting me up in a hotel, giving me some cool Outriders gear, and sponsoring this video. Without your support, opportunities like this never would have been possible. So allow me to offer my sincere thanks to each and every one of you. And of course, I want to thank you all for watching today. Much love to you, and I'll see you in the next video.